We'll go ahead and get started. If everybody can join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Thank you to everyone who's joining us tonight. We appreciate it. Those who are online, potentially, thank you. We will start with special recognition. Dr. Pierce will lead us through recognizing National School Counselor Week and National School Resource Officer Appreciation Day. Dr. Pierce.
Excellent. Well, good evening. Yes, it is National School Counseling Week. It's February 3rd through the 7th this year, and this is the week where we focus on the unique contribution of school counselors within our system and U.S. school systems. So this is a week that's sponsored by the American School Counseling or Counselor Association. And we celebrate our counselors this week. We celebrate them all the time, but we especially celebrate them this week. And then, of course, we celebrate all our certificated staff a little bit later this spring. The theme this year for National School Counseling Week is School Counseling Helping Students Thrive. So the association puts forth a proclamation each year in recognition of this week. And so I want to take this opportunity to read the proclamation and give a big shout out to all of our school counselors here in Kennewick School District. The proclamation says, whereas school counselors are employed in public and private schools to help students reach their full potential, and whereas school counselors are actively committed to helping students explore their abilities, strengths, interests, and talents as these traits relate to career awareness and development, and whereas school counselors help families focus on ways to further the academic, career, and social emotional development of their children, and whereas school counselors work with teachers and other educators to help students explore their potential and set realistic goals for themselves, and whereas school counselors seek to identify and utilize community resources that can enhance and complement comprehensive school counseling programs and help students become productive members of society, and whereas comprehensive school counseling programs are considered an integral part of the educational process that enables all students to achieve success in school. Therefore, the American School Counselor Association hereby proclaims February 3rd through 7th as National School Counselor Week. So we really do appreciate here in Kennewick all the hard work that our school counselors do. They do have a really important role in helping us fulfill our mission and our vision for students. We have 5 counselors at each of our comprehensive high schools. And that was something that we added in recent years, added an additional counselor because of the important work that they do to prepare students for the future. So lots of good work going on in our schools, and just want to recognize not just our high school counselors, but also our middle school and elementary counselors for all the work that they do. So if we can just maybe give them a big round of applause, that would be great. Okay, and we have another important group of people to recognize because February 15th is School Resource Officer Appreciation Day. And so here's a great picture of our school resource officers. As you know, we've got Kennewick police officers, school resource officers in all of our middle schools and high schools. Again, this is thanks to a great partnership with the City of Kennewick and Kennewick Police Department, and through funding through our levy. So that's how we pay for the school resource officer program, our share with the city, as well as our school safety officer program, which are, of course, those retired police officers that we have in all of our elementary schools. And we happen to have one here tonight, like we always do at one of our board meetings. So we're going to recognize not just our school resource officers, but our school safety officers too. So I'd like to read a proclamation from the National Association of School Resource Officers. And it reads, whereas the National Association of School Resource Officers is dedicated to making schools and children safer by providing the highest quality training to school-based law enforcement officers. And whereas school resource officers bridge gaps between youth and law enforcement and embrace a triad concept of school policing, serving in informal counseling education and law enforcement roles to support students and communities they serve. And whereas by training law enforcement officers to counsel, educate, and protect school communities, the men and women of NASRO continuously lead by example and promote a positive image of law enforcement to school children and school communities. Whereas SRO programs across the globe are founded as collaborative efforts by police agencies, law enforcement officers, educators, students, parents, and communities to create safe learning environments, provide valuable resources to school staff members, foster positive relationships with students, and develop strategies to resolve problems that affect youth with the goal of protecting all children so they can reach their fullest potential. And whereas school resource officers are valuable and essential members of the education community and deserve unwavering respect and support from the public in the pursuit of keeping schools and students safe. Now, therefore, the National Association of School Resource Officers hereby proclaims February 15th as School Resource Officer Appreciation Day, a special day to show appreciation for school-based law enforcement officers and encourage all citizens to show their gratitude with displays of support and personal messages. So we've been putting those personal messages out on our district social media for our school resource officers, along with our school counselors. So anyway, if we could now just have a round of applause for our SROs, we really appreciate them. Our SROs and our SSOs. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Pierce. When we started, we didn't have anybody signed up for public comments. I know a few people walked in late. Were you planning on sharing public comments? If not, totally fine. Just want to. Okay, perfect. All right. And nobody online, so we will move ahead. Our next item on the agenda is consent items. So I will take a motion to approve the consent items.
Move to accept the consent items as presented.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike. Patty, the roll call vote, please.
Mr. Connors?
Yes.
Dr. Miller?
Yes.
Ms. Gledhill? Yes. Mr. Valentine?
Yes.
And Mr. Galbraith?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Moving right along. Next up is communication follow-up. Nothing.
I do not have anything
Okay.
for communications follow-ups.
It's been a little while. Before we get into board reports, I'll just add the follow-up. I just want to thank the community, everybody who took part in our superintendent search, students, staff, everybody who committed to coming out for multiple nights and listening to all our candidates. We really appreciate your feedback. We value that, and I think we found a clear candidate who I think was right for the district, and we agreed to succeed Dr. Pierce. So again, just thank you guys so much for your role in that. So I will turn it down there to you, Mike.
I really had nothing. Just want to echo what you said regarding everyone participating in the superintendent search. It was a really long week, but well worth it. Yeah, exactly a couple of weeks. Thank you.
Dr. Miller?
Yeah, I think we'll all echo the same. I thought wonderful to see the community, staff, the administration all participating in the interview process. Appreciated their input and their feedback. I went through all of the pages of the input from all of the different members of the community, staff, that was and students. It really, it was. There was a clear favorite and clear. We're someone who I appreciate everybody's help on that. Other than that, I had a chance to participate with Boys and Girls Club, looking at or helping to participate with them in their Youth of the Year. One of the judges for that, and great time. Again, I'm always impressed by our youth, particularly youth as high school students are focusing on futures, recognizing that education is part of their life and helping them prepare for their future. And it goes graduating. It's really about moving forward in life and preparing yourself for your future.
Thank you, sir. Brittany?
So just like the other board members, the last 2 weeks were almost entirely consumed by interviewing and choosing the next superintendent, which was a great process. One of the candidates said, I haven't ever seen the process be this thorough before. So I took that as a compliment to our process and did feel that we were very thorough and feel very confident in our selection. So I did have an opportunity to go to the Math is Cool competition a couple of weeks ago, that's led by Linda Stevens, who is frequent and often supporter of the school district. And so that was really a great experience. I didn't get to stick around long enough to find out which team won, so I'll need to get that update from Linda. But I did get to even hop in and score a few sheets and talk with several of the math coaches, and it was fun to see the excitement there and see how dedicated the coaches are to seeing the kids excel. So it's a wonderful program, and I hope that we can help foster it and encourage it. So I did get a chance to come down to the district office yesterday and meet with some staff members just regarding the policy that we discussed our last school board meeting, gosh, almost a month ago, on the network and internet and electronic devices. So got to share some thoughts on the procedure and just some things that just some perspective. And so it was a great conversation. I learned a lot about what the district is already doing and what we hope to be able to do once some of our capabilities, some of our software capability catches up with what we want to have happen. So as far as a legislation update goes, I never really know. There's so much information. I don't really know how much information you want. I will at least give you an update on the three big, things that we're looking for. So Senate Bill 5263 is now in the Senate Ways and Means Committee, and that is about special education funding. And that one had unanimous support from the executive committee that looked at it. And so we're hopeful that it will continue to move through the Senate and then move on to the House. Senate Bill 5192 is also in the Senate Ways and Means Committee. This is about MSOC spending. The preferred bill for MSOC spending is actually the House bill. It's not gaining as much traction as the Senate bill is, but we're just excited that any of these bills are gaining traction and moving along. So this is all very good news. The next one is Senate Bill 5187, also in Senate Ways and Means, and this one is on transportation. And so the transportation bill and the special education funding bill had unanimous support from the executive committee. There was one dissenting vote for the MSOC bill, but still largely have good support, and I expect that they will pass this, and I'm hoping that they'll pass the Senate and move on to the House. There's a House bill, it's 1356. It is on levies. It's the only bill that addresses levies and bonds that's really getting any kind of attention. It's not getting a lot of attention. So that's a place where there's an opportunity to do a little bit of work. I didn't write down when it has its next public hearing, but I'll find that information for everyone and send it out so that if you want to log in, make a comment, then you can go ahead and do that. There are some bills that are not related to our three pillars that I think that our community will have some interest in. And I'm not going to go through in detail them. I'm just going to call out their bill numbers, and then those who are interested in looking at it more can. This is Senate Bill 5180, Senate Bill 5181, Senate Bill 5179, Senate Bill 5123, and then House Bill 1296. And several of them pertain to Initiative 2081 that was passed last year, the Parent Bill of Rights. A couple of these make pretty big amendments to that bill. And so if that's something that you'd like to weigh in on and make a public comment on, my favorite resource right now is fastdemocracy.com. It has great information on where the bills are currently, has a great summary of what the bill is doing, and then tells you where it's headed next. So just type in the bill you're interested in into their search and you'll find lots of great information.
Thank you. Micah?
All right. Well, you know, the reason why we're here, the reason why we do this is for the kids. A few weeks ago, I was at Amistad, and if you remember, I forgot my plaque, and I brought it here. So if you guys see the back of this, you'll know that this is why we do this for the kids. And these are all tier 2 kids at Amistad. One of them in particular I got to meet. He was very happy because he had a great day, and he got to work with Legos, and that was his favorite thing. So it was pretty cool. I met with Tom and Christine Benson in Nutrition Services. A big interest of mine is making sure we're feeding our kids the right things so that their brains work optimally, and so I'm very concerned about that. So a lot of conversation going about that, and we have some action items that we're kind of working through, and excited to see how that progresses. But I know that it's tricky. There's a lot of laws. There's a lot of money, and it's hard to have all the things line up just perfectly. So, but it's an equation that we're trying to improve on, that I'm trying to improve on. Went to the TriTech annual breakfast. It's like literally one of the best breakfasts around. It's amazing. Those kids, I mean, you know, they're making omelets for you on the spot. They've got other kinds of foods around, and it was great. So I saw some of our staff there as well. I went to the Delta High School mock interviews. I like doing that because I get to interview the kids, get to, you know, kind of press them a little bit. And I'll tell you what, we have some awesome kids. A couple of these kids, I was like, I would hire you today. And they're in high school, and they're fantastic. So very impressive. I went to watch. Went down to Hermiston over the weekend to watch some of our kids are in districts at the Kennewick and Southridge wrestling. Kids are wrestling, and we had some kids who finished very, very well in our district that will be heading on to state. So congratulations to them. And I mean, this is just a note as I watch wrestling matches, as I'm at TriTech, as I were at Delta mock interviews. I just want to like stress the importance of just striving for excellence in everything that we do, focusing on just really raising that bar and pushing that bar higher and higher for our kids, so they feel like there's no top and they can just keep on excelling. And I just love that mentality and attitude. This is in regards to the superintendent search. I feel that transparency builds trust, and I hope that everyone felt like it was an open, collaborative process since the beginning. I think that's something that I'll just say although I think that all of us are in agreement, but so I won't speak for the board. I just really think that we've really tried hard to make sure that we have really everything transparent. I think our first public meeting after COVID was when Gabe and I got sworn in, I believe. And so getting meetings back in person, live streaming everything, recording the meetings, texting the meetings out to everybody so everybody can have that, you know, addressing public comment a little bit differently so that people feel heard, etc. I just hope that that transparency is and it bled into the search as well, where almost all of our meetings were in public. We had a few executive sessions because that's mandatory, but everything was in public, and I hope everybody got a chance to interview the candidates if they wanted to, and ask them all the questions that they wanted to, and really push them and hear what they had to say back. And we also got a lot of feedback from the community about our candidates, and we read every single one of those feedback notes. We looked at them, we discussed them. It was an ongoing process, so very thorough, and I hope that everybody's very, very happy with the selection. I really feel really great about Lance Hansen. I think that he's going to do a fantastic job. From his references, we hear how he builds really good relationships. We think that he's going to be able to step in and just take off, and with very little, hopefully little downtime. One of the things that drew me to him specifically was his success in the classroom that he's had. His accreditation system based on standards from third-party groups. He trains all of his teachers ECRI certificates and trained, which stands for, actually, I don't know, I have it down somewhere. I can't remember, but he has an ECRI trained staff. That's how it's a specific way to teach reading to young kids. So we're very excited about that. He's won numerous awards, Superintendent of the Year in Idaho. He has a state superintendent, the state teacher of the year in his district. He has a state counselor of the year in his district. He has the only PLC model school in the state, which is the national award. And his reading scores. An article came out today. You guys can all look it up. That talks about how his the only school in Idaho has his reading scores back up to pre-pandemic levels. So we think that Tracy has done such an awesome job building doing a wonderful job, and we're really excited that. We're sad that she's leaving, but we're really excited for Lance to come in and just build on everything that's been built so far. So we're very, very excited about that. And with that, I yield my time.
All right, thank you. I mean, I'm not going to add much more to the superintendent search than everybody already has, but again, just thank you to everyone who was included. And other than that, it's just been with the legislative session going on, and then watching all these executive orders coming out, trying to figure out and look into those and what do those mean. So a lot of legislation stuff. So, and I totally skipped Dr. Pierce and Annie when we did the circle here. So Dr. Pierce, you're up.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple quick things. Had a good visit to Phoenix and JJC recently in the last couple of weeks since our last board meeting. JJC's Juvenile Justice Center, and of course our district runs the school that is connected to the Juvenile Justice Center. And there's a lot of potential changes at the state level in terms of oversight of those. So I'll give the board some update in the coming weeks on that, but I just want to give a shout out to Guy, who does a great job of serving as the principal of Phoenix and Legacy and JJC. And we've got a study session coming up on alternative programs, specifically those schools in the district. So we'll include some updates about the school that we run, the Juvenile Justice Center, JJC school, in that study session as well. Also, I know the board knows that we have had a system in place for many years where we conduct what we call learning walks. So it's groups of administrators, central office and building administrators go to do a classroom observation together. And we calibrate instructional, like collecting evidence for how we do our professional growth and evaluation system for teachers. So we specifically go and we look at examples of proficient and distinguished teaching and collect evidence against the framework that's used, and then have a conversation as building leaders and district leaders about what we saw and what made it proficient and distinguished, to calibrate the kind of expectations that we're wanting to see in classrooms. And are we all on the same page in terms of how we're interpreting what proficient and distinguished practice looks like in classrooms? Anyway, I had a great learning walk. We do these 3 times a year. We've got a big, pretty elaborate system in place to put these teams together, and the teams of administrators go. So for example, I was with middle school administrators. So we all go to a middle school and see a classroom in action. And so I just want to give a shout out to Casey Ferguson over at Chinook Middle School, because we saw a really excellent example of a teacher using Chromebooks with the students working in stations. I can't even really describe it well enough to you, but I just want, it takes an awful lot of planning and preparation to put together that kind of intentional learning experience for students that's really meaningful and engaging, uses the technology well, but doesn't overly rely on the technology, engages students in dialogue and problem solving and conversation. She just did a great job. She was our Crystal Apple Award winner, if you remember, last year. But I just want to give a shout out to her for the work that she did, and also just remind you of our learning walk process. Dottie Stevens is here, and I just want to give a little shout out and thank you to Dottie and everyone over at the Benton Franklin School Retirees Association, because they invite superintendents from Kennewick, Pasco, and Richland every year to come and present to their group. And so we did that about a week and a half ago, and we just always appreciate the opportunity to give a state of the district update to that group. So thank you. And we always have an opportunity to formally acknowledge and recognize them. That's coming up at the March 26th meeting. And then finally, I sent some information to the board earlier today, just to give you a sense of election results, preliminary election results across the state. So numbers of school districts across the state ran bonds or levies in this February election. This is typically the time where districts run, and the results are kind of continuing to be mixed. It's tough out there to get bonds passed, and so you'll see that in the election results that I sent. The levies kind of continue to be a mixed bag. We've got some local neighbors here, some of the smaller districts that whose levies aren't currently passing right now. Anyway, it's good for us to keep an eye out on how things are going statewide as we start to make our plans for our levy a year from now, right? So in February 2026, we'll have both the EP&O levy and the Capital Tech levy up for renewal. And, we've got a study session coming up in the spring just to have some preliminary conversation about that. But if you haven't had a chance to take a look at that, encourage you to take a look at it. And it really dovetails nicely with kind of back to legislative session and the advocacy needed around some of these issues. Because if the state's on the EP&O side, if the state's not fully funding education and districts are having trouble getting their levies to pass that make up the gap between what the state doesn't fund, it's a really difficult time. And of course, with the 60% threshold for bonds, it just continues to be super challenging. You'll notice bigger districts with lots of assessed value, like Bellevue, like Seattle, like Washington, they don't even have to put bonds on the ballot anymore. They just put levies on the ballot, and they can get enough money to actually do capital projects, build schools with that, and avoid having to run bonds altogether. So that's not a situation where we're going to be in, or any of our neighbors are going to be in for probably ever. So it's just another reminder about why that continuing to advocate for that 60% threshold coming down is always a standing item on the board's legislative platform.
Tracy, is it 60 or 65%?
60.
60%? Okay.
Yes.
I guess I was reading the information wrong, so I'll take a peek at that. So. Okay, yeah, I couldn't remember.
Yeah,
But
it's
anyway.
simple majority for levies,
Yeah.
and 60% for bonds.
Okay, well, that's, yeah, because when I was looking at some of the stuff that on there was like at 60, 62, 63%, it showed as failing.
Okay, so that's because they didn't meet, there's a column on there where it says they didn't meet the validation requirement.
Okay.
So there's a validation requirement.
Validation.
It's based on, don't totally quote me on this, but it's voter turnout, I think, from the last general election. You have to at least meet that threshold, or the numbers don't validate.
Okay, thank you. All right. I thought I missed something. Okay, thank you.
All right. Annie?
Good evening, everybody. You're actually not going to hear me talk a lot. I'm going to pass it over to Diego, and he's going to do the superintendent student advisory council report tonight for us.
Awesome. Great. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the board. I'm just going to share a little bit of what I've been up to in the last couple of weeks since we've last met. So 2 weeks ago, I was lucky to participate in both days of the preliminary interviews for our superintendent. And then last week, our superintendent student advisory council got to interview our 3 finalists as well. And I'm really happy that Ms. Gledhill and Mr. Connors were able to join us those 2 days, or those 3 days, sorry. And this morning, the Superintendent Student Advisory Council met, and we got a presentation from the Benton Franklin Council of Governments. They talked about how they're receiving and implementing federal grants, and their presentation today focused mostly on their comprehensive safety action plan. And then the second part of our meeting this morning was in relation to AI. So Mrs. St. Hilaire, and we also had Amy Francis, the Director of Career and College Readiness, speak with us today. And they showed us a KSD AI draft, a vision draft for our district. So still in the early stages of that being generated, but our students were able to provide feedback on 4 different sections for that vision, and those were classroom guidelines, staff use, student use, academic integrity. So those were the 4 sections that our students got to look at, more or less what we're writing down, and we were able to provide comment on that if we had any changes that we might be better for clarity or for how relevant those are. I don't know if I'm missing anything. Thank you.
Good. Awesome. Thank you, Diego. Appreciate it. All right. That'll wrap up superintendent and board member reports. So we will move into reports and discussions. First up is our capital projects fund update. Dr. Brillhart and Mr. Ryan Jones will be co-presenting. Or you pawn it right off to Ryan if you want to.
For the betterment of all, I probably should. So.
Awesome. Thank you.
This slide. All right, good evening, everyone. So again, we wanted to obviously give everyone an update on where we are in the status of our capital project fund. And as we have discussed before, the main premise behind the strategic goals with this, of course, making sure that our kids remain safe, known, and valued, and all community members are important collaborators. And of course, the district is innovative, proactive, and accountable. So just a couple of big items just to remind everyone on. So any projects costing more than $250,000, again, those can obviously be funded out of the capital fund. Within the general fund, though, however, we can do what we would normally do as capital projects, but they have to stay under a threshold of $500,000. So again, that's not typical, but it's almost like an emergency type of situation. We have the flexibility to do that. Any property purchases are typically funded out of the capital fund unless it's program specific. So again, in very unique circumstances, if there was a special needs situation where we needed to, purchase a lot for something, that again, technically we could use special needs monies for that. But again, that'd be extremely, extremely unique. And again, just a reminder, due to the fact that again, some strain on our general fund, we're probably going to have less flexibility to use our general fund monies for any capital projects and major items, just because, again, a lot of obligations are already tied up in the general fund. That, again, is going to limit our capability to do that in the near future.
Tom, can I just ask a question super fast? Is that just best practices, or do we actually have some legislation that spells out what we can and can't spend from capital funds versus general funds?
So make sure I understand your question. Can you clarify? I just want to make sure.
Yeah, so the parameters that you had up there was that if it's anything above 250,000, it's going to come out of our capital funds. We can do something up to, less than 500,000 from general funds. And I'm just wondering if that's simply best practices or if we're actually mandated that those are our.
That is in statute. So it is a limitation.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a controls, obviously, that way districts don't egregiously spend their general fund money on assets. So
sure. Great.
But thank you for answering that. So, all right, let me move on here. Yes. So, of course, as we all aware, as Mrs. Dr. Pierce alluded to earlier, the majority of our capital funds, of course, do come from bonds. And obviously, right now we do have our tech levy, which I'll get to here in a second. So anything from school construction assistance program, SCAP, which we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail here in a little bit. Any investment earnings that we have, and any funding transferred from the general fund, which again is in unique circumstances. Voters approved our capital levy fund which was primarily used for student devices and other curricular needs that the district needed a handful of years ago. And of course, that was alluded to in for 4.5 million, 4.75, and 5 million respectively. And of course, that was for fiscal year 24, 25, and 26. So on school construction assistance program, of course, this is a methodology that we can apply for assistance through the state. We actually had a good rundown today with Mr. Mark Brown, who's our regional coordinator, who kind of helped re-explain the process because it is a very complex formula. So in essence, that formula is set aside to, of course, again, help districts that qualify, help for buildings that have met that 30-year threshold that again qualify for needs, whether it be an extension, whether it be a new roof, an update, whatever that may be. It does get a little complex because, of course, it's all about square footage per child for elementary and middle and high. And then there's other factors too that come into the equation too with overall student enrollment, whether it be through K through 5, 6 through 8 in our case, and 9 through 12 as well to determine, again, which buildings technically qualify. And then also there's a formula adjuster with there for your local AV. So that it's a number that the state looks at your entire AV for your entire district that you have. And again, they give you a threshold, again, to help calculate how much money would be appropriate per if your AV was here in the state versus there in the state, just to kind of equalize that. Again, very, very complex, and even sitting through his presentation this morning, actually, not sure if even he fully understands it, because again, there's so many formulas behind the scene, and it changes year to year. And of course, it's based on a lot on the biennium budget as well. So, but generally, in general speaking, again, usually, of course, you always try to aim to have about half to maybe 60% of your projects funded through SCAP. So that's good practice. That way, we're not using local monies to help, obviously build our buildings, help maintain our buildings. But again, it's a methodology and a game that we have to make sure that we put ourselves in a position that we're going to be able to utilize those resources when they become available to us due to the formula for funding. So again, just as an example, if we were a 90,000 square foot building and we were wanting to expand to 110,000, so again, a portion of that 20,000 could, of course, be SCAP funded if it met all those criteria that I was speaking of previously. So as of today, the district does not qualify for any SCAP funding, and again, that's at no fault of anyone's. It's again because it's primarily enrollment driven, and it's age driven for that technicality to be old enough again to beat that threshold. So again, as I said earlier, when and if we get to that point where we feel like we do qualify, then that's when we would engage with OSBI's regional coordinator, Mark, and obviously we would start that conversation and have that assessment done for the district in totality. Just a snapshot of our capital projects fund. So just a couple things that I do want to point out on here is our main difference between our revenues from year to year and our expenditures, which the biggest placeholder, as you'll see, is the biggest difference is our TriTech project. Not a big surprise. And again, this is a grant-funded project through the state. And again, I commend Paul and the board on helping obtain that. It's going to be a great project. Of course, Ryan's leading the charge on that. So again, we're excited to see that finished product. So as you can see, we're budgeting for revenues about 8.5 this year, 26.4 the next year, and about 9.2 the following year. As you can see, the expenditures kind of follow that same thing. Again, the majority of that is with the TriTech project. And then, as you can see, we kind of normalize, if you will, for projected 27, 28, and 28, 29. Of course, we'll determine what our tech levy amount will be at that point, and maybe a capital levy, maybe. But again, that's another conversation to have at a later time. So.
Okay, it's a quick question. Yep. So I just noticed on the TriTech we've got, so the first year we're laying out, 10.5 million, and the state's only giving us 8.5. Then we catch up the next year. Is there any reason for that, or is it just a timing deal, or how does that work?
I believe it is a timing deal. I'm guessing it's mainly due to upfront costs, like with obviously renderings and architects and construction management and so on and so forth. I would assume that would be the case, but we can dig deep into that and we'll get you an answer on that. It's a good question.
We're made whole, but
Yeah.
I just was wondering, they're gonna, we've got to lay out an extra $2 million here for over the
Yeah.
course of the year, which is, that cost us money as well. So I
Yes,
just
sir.
wasn't sure how that all worked out, but
Yes, sir.
again, that's technicality.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
No, it's a good question. It's good observation. Any other questions on this slide? Okay. All right. So again, just a couple reminders. Again, these aren't new topics by no means, but obviously anytime we can make sure that we proclaim our needs for an EP&O levy, and the tech levy that's coming up, we're going to make sure that we do that. Again, the current tech levy and EPO, of course, will be up for renewal in 2026. Again, that significant increase to those levy amounts is going to be paramount, obviously, for the district's budget in totality. And the last bond that the district passed was in 2019. As of right now, those projects with that 2019 bond are completed. Of course, that would include a Ridgeview. In the summer of 2023, we did have our facility executive committee go through all the buildings and, of course, determine whether or not what our ICOS score would be. And again, with that SCAP funding, and again, determined that as of 2023, and honestly, as of today, because of our enrollment has not changed in the trajectory that we need. Again, as of right now, we just technically do not qualify for any SCAP funding as of today. But as noted on the slide, our process with that facility executive committee will be getting back together with Ryan leading that charge here this spring, and we'll report back to the board on updates when that is completed. And again, just to kind of lay out our calendar, again, EP&O levy and the tech levy are up for renewal in 2026. And if it's determined in 27 or 28, potentially for us to possibly go after a construction bond, that's when we will do that. And the next EP&O levy and tech levy cycle will be in 2030. All right, I will now turn it over to Mr. Jones.
Good evening, members of the board, Dr. Pierce. So as you can see here, this is just a slide kind of our capital projects that you'll see some reference from last year that were done this summer, and then also what we're looking forward to. So if you remember, one of the biggest projects this last year was phase 1 of our asphalt maintenance. So we were able to get a good cost on that. It came in at $738,000, which is much better than it came into around 1.3 the previous year. So kind of holding off on the year on that. There's some big savings for the district. So looking forward to some of our other lots that are needing work. Right now, we're in kind of a preliminary planning for Horse Heaven Hills parking lot off of 36th Avenue, as well as looking at the Lamson parking lot. Two things on the Lamson. I mean, it's been there a long time since I had any work on it. Well, I'll get into the details of the parking lot, I think, on the next slide, and then I'll dive into a little more. But there's also, we're evaluating a possible ECAP parking lot expansion on the Amistad site. There just isn't enough for staff and people that come to drop off their children. It's a little different than a standard elementary school. There isn't really a drop off where the kids can then enter the campus. You know, it's park, check them in. So that almost doubles like their needed parking spaces. So they're about 40 short right now. So we're looking for some sites that make sense, you know, in that vicinity, and looking at what that might look like. So, and then there's a project in the IT room we're shooting for this summer. So it's just getting to the point where we want a more dependable option and some redundancy, just to make sure that if that we have to do maintenance on the existing system, we can still maintain cooling, because as you can imagine, all those servers, that room gets pretty hot. We're also looking at a way in the redundancy option is if there's a failure in the middle of the night or something, no one's around. Ideally, the secondary cooling would be able to kick in, and, you know, until we can kind of get there the next morning. I'm sure they get alerts, but it would buy us time, basically. And that would be a split system is what we're looking at as far as the secondary. So athletic scoreboards, if you recall, we originally were looking at LaPierre, and we were thinking about Southridge. Now, Southridge was more, we were trying to be a little more proactive. The board wasn't really showing any signs of necessarily failing yet, but it was an aged board. It was, you know, from original construction, so we're trying to get ahead of it. Well, in the meantime, Roy Johnson's kind of got bumped to the top of the priority list because it was in need of replacement. So at this moment, we got LaPierre and Roy Johnson scoreboards that are going to get installed prior to the season. And so if you make it out there, you'll see them up there. And they're nice thing is they're school colors. You know, the previous boards were Pepsi boards, so they kind of had the standard Pepsi blue, but you know, a little bit more branding on these ones. Reader boards, I know we mentioned it before. This is kind of, we're getting to the point where a lot of these reader boards are kind of going through their life cycles. You know, it's about 10 to 12 years is what we expect out of some of our older boards. So we're kind of making our way through our first round of new construction, our cookie cutter schools, prototypes. And so that's just going to be something probably that's going to be something we consistently go back to try and make sure the schools have, functioning reader boards. We try to make them last as long as we can, but some of these parts are just getting hard to get. So, but the industry itself's moved forward quite a bit recently. So they've gotten much more into standardization to where parts are able to be intermixed. So hopefully moving forward, we'll have a lot more repair options. But
And have those been purchased already?
no, they have not. They have not been purchased yet.
We talked a little about, getting sponsors, right, for the boards. Where's that at?
So,
I know
Yeah,
you
yeah,
said that.
tonight, the one for Lamson.
Yeah.
So we did an RFP, Lamson's. And we have that, and, you just accepted that.
Yeah.
Tonight.
Yeah, but-
Like I said, so that's the one, we've done it for the Lamson scoreboard.
Right.
Can we do it for these ones?
That was where I was
So these kind of predate the whole RFP process because these got into the works like back in June, well before we were even talking about going out there looking for sponsorships. I don't know retroactively. We can look at that to see. They have an ad panel at the top of them, which is where we're putting the school branding. Kamaikan Braves or Kennewick Lions. There is opportunity for an ad panel at the bottom. I don't know what the market looks like out there. But
retroactively, if it's money is money, right? So if somebody wants to sponsor it, we can put their thing at the bottom of it and they can pay for part of it.
we'd have to check. I mean, I guess
Yeah.
we'd have to look at that
Yeah.
RFP process and how that would work. But theoretically, we're closer to having a mechanism for that than we were last year. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So it's
Let's
definitely
take-
something we can look at.
We can go back and take a look at it. It's possible,
And it's a much more, because the Lamson one was quite
big dollar amount.
right. And
Yeah.
so it's
Mhm.
37,000.
Yeah, and, now that we do have this RFP process, these aren't the only athletic boards that are, come and need for replacement, right? So it's actually great that RFP process is now existing because there will be a lot of other opportunities, whether it's middle school, interior scoreboards and whatnot. I think moving forward, I think we'll have a lot more opportunities to kind of try to get these costs, hopefully, to a degree taken care of. Or
Especially if we can brand it with the school and then still have some sort of sponsorship like at the bottom or something.
certainly, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, if there's a way to retroactively look at it, that would take a look.
We can
Yeah.
save money, let's do it.
All right, we'll take a look. So then Tritex up there, so it's out for advertisement right now. So it's in the paper being advertised. Contractors are starting to take a look at it. And the bid date is 3/13/25. There's a little more detailed breakdown as we get further in the presentation. And then roofs are just kind of an ongoing thing. It's a big part of our asset preservation program. Just there's always a roof somewhere in the district that needs some attention. Kamaikan's kind of been a phased roof repair over the years, going back probably 4 years. We've been kind of trying to take care of one building at a time and address it. So that's just something that, very common to have up there.
Kamaikan's roofs, these are older buildings that weren't touched in the additional build or anything.
Well, you mean the recent project in?
Yeah, like
Night-
21 or 22.
Yeah, so that would have been just the 700 hall. So that really, a lot of that was the athletic complex and then the 700
Okay, so
building.
these are the older.
Correct. Yeah. So these roofs would have been more like around the time of the modernization, around 05. So, they've got about 20 years on them. And, some roofs, depending on the type, some will last longer than others. And just kind of depends on how much beating they take. So then HVAC, we don't really have currently have any major overhauls planned. We're really just kind of as we're keeping an eye on units as they go down, we're replacing them as needed. So we were always on the lookout for grants and things like that to maybe if we saw one that made sense, we could maybe apply for it and maybe do something a little large scale. But as of now, we're not doing too terrible. We're just kind of maintaining units.
Brian, really quick, the Southridge. I know we had.
Yes.
That, so do I Do I want to open that can of worms up or
Uh,
do that later?
I would love to say it's further along than it is. There was a lot of back and forth between the engineers and the contractors, and ultimately everybody's just trying to make sure that whatever we end up doing is the right solution. The engineering firm has been participating in the process, providing us drawings and doing their calcs and whatnot. The contractors, of course, continuing to refine their number as that moves around, but they're supposed to have their latest plans to us by end of day Friday. So once we have those, we'll look at them, make sure everyone feels good about them. But ultimately, when we walked it, after the first initial set of plans came out, we got out there with the contractors, and the contractors really felt there might be a better way, a less expensive way to do it. I'm more focused on the better way because we want a one-time fix here. We don't want to keep chasing this thing.
Right.
This is kind of our last shot to get it right. So it's not as far as long as I wish it was, but we are continuing to track it.
Thank you.
Offline, I have a roof comment for you.
All right.
Don't let me forget.
Okay, so I'll be leaving immediately after this. No.
Do you want us to look at sponsorship for roof?
Helicopters fly by, if we could get them, I'll do it.
Pending any further questions, I'll move on. Next slide. So this is the breakdown, a little more specifics on the paving projects we're planning for this summer. So as you can see, there's the parking lot off 36. So looking more like for a crack seal coat there. It's just aged, and of course the crack fill helps take care of further deterioration of the initial asphalt surface. And then the seal coat really just kind of helps keep that all together. The aggregate over time, it starts to break up. You've seen it. You'll see gravel in lots. That seal coat kind of puts a nice fresh seal on it and keeps that from happening. Now, Lamson, the bigger one, so you can see we're going to try and do hopefully an overlay on the primary parking lot there, which is also utilized by Kinokai. So it's a regularly used parking lot. Reason we can't really do crack seal coat there is some of the cracks have just gotten too large. You usually can do a crack seal up to like half an inch, and some of those out there are almost two inches. So we're kind of beyond that. What we're trying to assess right now, and hopefully won't have to do, is a full demo and pave, because that obviously is a considerable more cost. You have demo costs, not to mention you're 4 inches instead of 2 inches on asphalt material. So that's what we're trying to do there. And then toward the north there, I don't know if you've ever had a chance to kind of walk that area. If you recall, that's where a lot of the portables were for the Kennewick High project. So ultimately that area has just been chopped up over the last 5 years as we brought portables in and brought them out. There's conduit runs that are kind of gravel to grade. So what we'd really like to do is two things: is one, restore that to a functioning parking lot, whether it be for Lamson events or Fruitland, or really just make it look better. But also as part of that, we have considerable amount of infrastructure underground there, and currently it's kind of daylighting. It's conduits daylighting out the asphalt. So what we'd like to do is get in there and put traffic rated like access boxes to protect those conduits, and so that when we get into maybe a future bond, hopefully, and we have some middle schools rolling through there, we'll likely need portables to come back. It's just more of a drop, hook up, and we don't have to worry about any compromised infrastructure. So that's kind of what we're targeting to do up there.
That was my question, because it seems like that's an unused parking lot. So to demo, repave, when nobody ever uses it, it seems. But if we did that, we are going to find use for it.
Well, what we would do is we'd stripe it, because there have been people that have mentioned that it'd be nice to have that accessible for sporting events and whatnot. Additionally, I won't want to say it's very rough. So when you have a lot of student traffic through there, it's just a lot of different grades. A lot of tripping hazards out there. So really anything we can do to kind of restore us from when we do have middle schools there will make it better. And it doesn't drain very well. So that's one of the reasons why the demo and repave is we're going to have to go back in there and work the grades to make sure that it's draining towards catch basins and whatnot. It doesn't basically create a bunch of pools out there.
I guess I just want to make sure we use it. If we're going to spend
Definitely.
money, I want to make sure that, like, when we go to a football game, that there's people are parking back there and actually using the space.
Yeah, and I imagine if it's whether it's parking or people setting up for tailgating or it's really just a better improved surface for whatever kind of activities we want to have out there. But right now it's just, like I said, it's just so chopped up that it's not really being used for anything.
How about, when we do this, are we gonna be able to look at speed bumps? 'Cause I know one concern is with the high schoolers speeding through there on their way out, because there's only the one exit if you go out towards Fruitland, and so is that something potential that we could look into, or if there's a certain number, I don't know, just.
We can definitely look into that. You know, speed bumps can always be tricky. I don't know, looking at some of the video, you know, sometimes they slow down, sometimes they don't, you know, but then they just have a repair bill. But you know, speed bumps can be problematic during plowing times, a lot of times. So we try to avoid them where we can because they just kind of slow down the snow removal process and sometimes can damage equipment. But we can certainly, you know, maybe we don't get too carried away with it, but if there's a couple places that make sense, you know, we can definitely look at that. Speed bumps are easy.
I just have one more question about the
Yeah.
overlay, in the blue section there.
Mhm.
So, how long does that last?
How long does it last? Oh, you get 12, 15 years. I mean, about the same as a standard asphalt if it's actually maintained. And we've actually kind of stepped up a lot of our parking lot maintenance. You know, we now have a crack filler, so we're going out and doing a lot of our own crack filling, you know, to ensure that we're getting ahead of these before, you know, they start to deteriorate through the freeze thaw cycle. So, I mean, it'll be a considerable amount of time. Because it's basically just asphalt on top of an asphalt subgrade. So,
Very good.
any more questions? So here's just kind of a, you know, as Dr. Bohar mentioned, you know, the 2019 bond projects completed. This is kind of a rundown of, you know, projected versus actual. And I believe you've seen this last year. So just more of a reminder, really. That's kind of what last thing we were working on. So.
What's the going rate of an elementary right now, like a rebuild?
So,
I know
yeah.
I mean, what are we, like 45 million?
No, I wouldn't say that. I mean,
Not that much.
Ridgeview, as you see, came in around 32, and you know that's kind of where we're seeing it at. You know, one nice thing is, you know, if we can't get some SCAP eligibility moving forward, you know, the state increased their per square foot rate from, I believe it was around 272 to now it's like 375. So I mean, they upped it almost $100, which is still under what the average, you know, per square foot jobs coming in at, but it's much improvement. Now if we can just get them to increase the allotment of square footage per student, you know, because that'll go a long ways to helping some of those enrollment numbers that Dr. Brillhart was referring to, those equations, because that'll totally change our housed and unhoused numbers and hopefully work in our favor. It's just funny because, you know, we talk about class size reduction, but a number of years ago we had the K3 CSR money to reduce class sizes, but now it's like, well, now you have to get bulging full overflowing until you can reduce your, you know, getting money to try and keep your class size down.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, it all means more money, so it's kind of tough.
Does Fruitland count as part of our?
It does not.
It doesn't.
It is a diamond in the rough. I mean, it's a gem. Like there are a lot of school districts that would love to have a building like Fruitland, and I don't know if you've had a chance to tour in recent years.
No, never.
So you know,
That might
when
be
Kennewick
overselling it just in case you're wondering, but go ahead.
when Kennewick High went in there, you know, we tried to do some improvements to the finishes and whatnot. You know, it's a pretty nice building. You know, we just
And
Yeah.
TriTech will be in there, remember? So
Correct.
Sure,
during
I'm
the
not
TriTech,
advocating that we get rid of it. I was
Yeah,
just
yeah.
curious.
No, the nice-
It doesn't
Counting
count,
against
because we can
Yeah,
only use
to your-
it as a swing space or
Sure.
non-K-12, or it would have to go into our inventory.
Yeah, to your point, yeah, it got godfathered in, and they're not, you know, they're aware of it, but they're not holding it against us. So, in fact, every time they come through here, they're just like, man, everybody wishes they had a building like that. If there's no questions.
Can we
during
rent
this
it
slide.
out to other districts? If they ever needed it,
Yeah, if we didn't, if we weren't
get
using
some
it.
return on our
Potentially,
investment.
yeah,
Potentially.
potentially.
Well, let's let Pasco and Richland know. Sponsors for scoreboards, renting out.
I know.
We're gonna turn this thing around.
So TriTech, that's really what we got going on right now. So this is kind of the culminating event, so to speak, for TriTech. This is the modernization of the original 1981 build. So there's basically, we're going to be chopping this whole area up and kind of reorganizing it, modernizing it for some of the programs, making it make more sense. It kind of grown into what the space was from built in 81, and so now we're going to be optimizing it for what programs they have. So it should be a good project. We are working on trying to hand over. I don't know if you recall that we originally kind of proposed this might be like a multi-phase project. You know, students will be in one area and the contract in another, and then they'll move. Contractors will move here, students will move somewhere else. Right now, it's not looking that's going to have to be the case. We're really working hard to find a space for all of those programs off-site. Well, off-site. Fruitland being one primary site and CBC being the other. So with that, we can turn over the entire footprint to the contractor, at once, which is, it's just best case for everyone from a safety standpoint, coordination standpoint, utility standpoint. It's really the best way to move forward. So, that's a huge credit to Paul Randall. He's been really working that piece of it. So, to his credit. But as you can see, went out for advertisement this weekend. So pre-bid walk on the 25th, open bids on the 13th, and then hopefully before you on the 26th with some good numbers. Really, there isn't a whole lot out there right now. We're kind of in a great bidding environment for a project like this. So hopefully it'll be to our benefit, or the state's rather. But and kind of to your question earlier, like just as far as the expenses go, we obviously get invoiced for services regarding this project, whether they be construction or professional services. We process them, we submit for reimbursement, and they've been turning around within a week. So really, it's kind of money out, money back in. So we're not carrying a huge balance. Luckily, the state's working with us really well on getting those in right away. So, any questions on TriTech?
We should get extra money because we're the one doing it.
You'd probably tell us we get a school. All right. Benton, any questions? That concludes the presentation.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.
So much.
Appreciate it. Thank you to you and your team for all your hard work. All right, next up, we will have our annual report for special education, Matt Scott and Lexi. Floor is yours.
Great.
Cruising right along tonight.
Well, we'll try to keep it going. So we're here for our annual report. And kind of like Tom, I'm going to talk very briefly and then turn it over to our expert, Lexi, to kind of work us through some of the information. So again, we wanted to spend a little bit of time every year coming and annually updating the board with information about our special services programs, including enrollment, our inclusion rates, but also mainly our efforts towards improvement in terms of helping students be safe and have the behavioral supports they need, and as well as our efforts to engage parents in their child's education. So as we kind of work through, it's really important for us to always remember that our special education students are gen ed students first. And we really embrace an all means all attitude towards providing education. So all of our student goals, be it students being safe, known, and valued, or all students being engaged learners, or all students being ready for the future, apply to our special education qualified students just as much as they do for our gen ed students. And so we have several annual objectives that impact the programs for these students. So this year we're working to strengthen student behavioral expectations and our multi-tiered systems of support to promote positive behavior, providing our staff with more clarity about appropriate responses to behavioral violations and things that are impacting students, all students, but including our special education students. We also are working to strengthen our inclusionary practices. And when we talk about inclusionary practices, we're really talking about instructional practices that happen in a classroom that enable a student, regardless of their disability, to be able to benefit from the education in that classroom. And these are practices that our special education practitioners and our gen ed practitioners are working to strengthen, and we have a few different things we're working on with that. But part of that is also working to develop a 5-year plan, kind of a vision for where we want to be with steps along the way as we develop our multi-tiered systems of support implementation plan. And then also, as we talk about students being ready for their future, I know that our community is aware. We started about 5 years ago, I believe, maybe 6 years ago, our Community Employment Transition Program, with the efforts towards having our students who are 18 to 21, now 22 years old, have an opportunity to practice the job skills and develop independent living skills and to support their post-school outcomes. So we really think that we're at a time now where we need to work on probably a recommendation for 25 and 26 to work on strengthening that program and to help give more students access to that program. So we keep track. Our most important performance indicators really are inclusion rate, and Lexi's going to speak a little bit more about that. But we are working to increase the number of students who are educated the majority of their day with their non-disabled peers. We're trying to increase that by more than 3% or greater than 3% a year. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Lexi. To Lexi, who's going to kind of walk us through some of the data pieces, but also talk about the different things we're doing to work to improve. And she will handle the challenging questions, but I'm here for the easy ones if she needs, if we have any of those. So Lexi, come on up.
Dr. Pierce. Thank you, Matt. All right, we're going to jump in right now, just talking about where our student enrollment is in special education. So what you see here is our trends over the last number of years. You'll notice that we've seen a steady increase in our special education enrollment after COVID. And you see a bit of a drop this year with our special ed enrollment. And so I kind of wanted to address, because I'm sure that there's questions about why that has gone down. As a district, we've been focusing and putting a lot of emphasis on strengthening our Tier 1 instruction, working on MTSS processes, identifying interventions. And so as we have done that, students are not being referred at the same rate that they have been in the past. We still honor and acknowledge every special education referral, but we've seen a decrease in the number of referrals. Additionally, over the last 2 years, we've been working with an organization, Northwest Speech Consultants. As you know, we serve a very diverse population here in the Tri-Cities in Kennewick. And we recognized that we were qualifying a large number of students speech only. And really, when we started looking at that, we were recognizing, do they have a speech disability or are they learning a second language? And so as we've worked with Northwest Speech Consultants, we've also seen that number. So those two factors have played into some of the decrease, as well as kind of our enrollment trends as a district. So this is our percentage of special education students over time. I show this because it's an important factor as we think about special education funding. I think Ms. Gledhill talked a little bit about some of the bills that are being considered right now by the legislature. Last year, the one bill that was special education funding that was passed increased the special education cap to 16%. So they will fund up to 16%. You'll see right now we're at about 13.6% as of our October 1st enrollment. So we would receive funding for all special education students that we qualify. Now, I think as SPED directors, we're often advocating for, increasing the cap is great for small districts. What we really want to advocate for is the increase in the multiplier. I think the multiplier is really what impacts us and our ability to meet students' needs. But I do show this so that you know kind of where the funding cap is and where we fall in regards to that. This is our current special education program, teacher staffing by program. So you'll see here kind of what our current enrollment is as of kind of right now in January. So we have about like 137 students at Keewaydin. We have 9 teachers and 14 paras. So we look at kind of what is our adult to student ratio. So we look at that across our programs so that we can kind of see how are we supporting? What does the adult support look like for the students in our program? Additionally, you'll see in one of our upcoming slides as we talk about least restrictive to most restrictive placements, do you see kind of our adult support increasing as students receive more support in our program? So from a resource room, we're a ratio of 1 to 10. When we look at students in our life skills or our Tier 3 autism, we're looking at a ratio of closer to 1 adult to every 2 students. So currently we have 112 teachers and just under 300 paraeducators across our district serving our special education students. So our program enrollment trends, one of the questions that got asked by the board last year was kind of our program enrollment trends over time. So we may have seen kind of a drop in our overall special education student enrollment, but you see that we have actually been increasing a number of our program enrollments. So you see that like our tier 2 autism was at 116 last year. This year we're at 120. And I will say that when you look at the data for the previous years through 23, 24, those are end of year numbers. And so right now we're still mid-year and kids are still being recommended for programs. We're still adding students as the year goes on. So this is kind of still a year-to-date picture of our program enrollments over the years. So now moving on to kind of our inclusion, our one, as Matt said, it's our one indicator that we have, our performance indicator in our strategic plan that aligns specifically to our special education efforts, and that is around our least restrictive environment. You'll see here that we have a visual that kind of depicts our least restrictive. When we say least restrictive in IEP terms, we're looking at students who are in LRE1 spending 80 to 100% of their day in general education with their non-disabled peers. In KSD, a lot of those students are referred to as resource students. And then we kind of move along our continuum. We have inclusion, autism, and behavior. We also have life skills and autism classes, which a larger number of those students are our LRE3 students. And then we have students that actually there's a variety of additional LRE codes for students that are maybe served at JJC. They're served in out-of-district placements. So there is some other restrictive LRE codes beyond just LRE3. So where are we at right now? You'll see here depicted by the blue line is the state of Washington LRE1 percentage. So the state is at 66.2. We are currently at 54.7. The great news and cause for celebration is that we did achieve our goal from last year. We made 3.7% increase from 23-24. So we achieved that strategic plan goal. So our goal for November 2025 will be that 57.7, kind of adhering to that consistent 3% or greater increase in our LRE1 percentage. One of the things I think I've said over the years is we want to make sure that we're doing inclusion right. We want our gen ed teachers to feel equipped with tools and resources to meet a diverse needs. So as we work to strengthen our tier 1 instruction, our core instruction, that will afford the ability for us to include more and a more diverse population of our special education students. But we are making progress and we are doing what's best for kids. So one of the things I wanted to show this year is as we look at our efforts and where we focus our efforts with LRE, what you see depicted here is our KSD LRE data. In blue is LRE1 and our percentage of students in LRE1. So in kindergarten, 70% of students are receiving 80 to 100% of their day in general education. In first grade, that dropped to 65.6. So remembering that the state average is about that 62%, you see the trends across grade levels is that we have a pretty significant drop off from 5th to 6th grade. So one of the things that we have kind of identified is what do we need to do to focus some efforts around that 5th to 6th grade transition, because that's where we're seeing this kind of sharp change in our data from 5th to 6th grade. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. So what are our efforts to improve our inclusion rate? Like I said, we're improving our tier 1 instruction through multi-tiered system of supports, professional learning communities, identifying essential standards, and universal design for learning. All of those things we are working collaboratively together to develop kind of our MTSS implementation plan, as well as our kind of 5-year plan for inclusionary practices. We want to continue to grow inclusionary practices. So what are we doing for our staff to support this? We have worked to develop some MTSS and PLC guidance documents. We have recently developed an inclusive practice tool, which is a KSD handbook that our inclusionary practices cohort teachers are going to be reviewing and providing input. We look at our inclusionary practices cohort teachers as kind of our early adopters and our seed planters that we want to grow their skills. And so we are creating resources, taking them to those teachers and having them provide feedback on how we kind of create an implementation plan to spread this information district-wide. We have a teacher book study going on right now about unlearning. What the book targets is that as teachers, as educators, we can become kind of accustomed to doing things the way we've always done it. So when we think about inclusion, sometimes there's some unlearning that has to happen. We have to kind of challenge some of our belief systems and approach it as a new way of learning and approaching our work. So there is that book study that's going on. As I said, we have our inclusionary practices teacher cohort. We do ongoing monthly special services job-alike meetings where we provide professional development to our teachers. We talk about what our plans are for inclusionary practices, how we're working as a collective whole to improve that. We use that as an opportunity to provide feedback and to see how we can support them in these efforts. I'm also partnering with our teaching and learning colleagues and our teachers have kind of identified as we start to push in and provide more support in general education, we want to strengthen our skills, our knowledge, and our toolbox. So how do we share resources with our teaching and learning specialists and strengthening our instructional practices for our special education teachers so that they can kind of begin the partnership in providing support in gen ed. Lastly, we have kind of strengthened our IEP compliance review. We review every IEP that comes down to our office to make sure that LRE is coded correctly, it matches students' schedules, and so that is something that's new this year. Additionally, as I mentioned, we are working to establish a 5-year plan regarding inclusionary practices. Some efforts have already been made along those lines, though. We know that we want to focus on scheduling, resources, and professional development. I will also say, when I talk to our parent advisory committee, I think an important part of this will be our communication with our community. As we talked about with our parent advisory committee, inclusion, there's lots of different beliefs about inclusion. And so part of that is going to be educating our community about the steps that we're taking so that we're bringing our parents and our community partners along with us. We did add this year, every school improvement plan has a goal focused on LRE. So buildings are looking at their LRE data and they're taking active steps to improve inclusion as part of their school improvement plan. And then we also have a monthly special services data dashboard that tracks our LRE improvements. We let buildings know where they are every month so that we are collectively working together to make improvements. Another big highlight I think that we've had where we have seen some great strides as part of our K-5 ELA and math adoption process, we have involved special education, and we've really kind of revamped what that looks like, involving our special education teachers across our continuum, from our resource teachers to our tier 3 teachers. They all participated in the professional development. We've been working with our paraeducators. How do we make sure that we're giving skills to all of our staff to really make sure that all means all in Kennewick? Lastly, we've updated our transition process. So we really want to focus this year on that 5th to 6th grade transition where we see that drop in our data. So we have revamped our kind of transition process. Our goal for teams is to maintain students' LREs. So we've done a number of things to bring about the data to our building principals, to have them start reflecting, thinking of questions, and helping be strong leaders in those meetings. But again, our goal really is to focus on maintaining LRE from 5th to 6th. And then also, what is the PD that we're going to provide as we see more kids in our 6th grade general education classes? As Matt mentioned at the beginning, one of our recommendations that we would like to see maybe moving forward is the board to consider an objective potentially around our special education post-school outcomes. What you see here, we do every year something that's called our Levers data. So when special education students either age out or graduate and they are done with the K-12 system, a year after, we follow up and we conduct an interview. The state requires it. You'll see that we have achieved our response rate for each of the years. We're at that 70% or higher. But we reach out to families and ask, what are students doing? What you see depicted here, and it's probably hard to see, is the column A is enrolled in higher education within 1 year of leaving high school. Column B depicts students enrolled in higher education or competitively employed 1 year after leaving high school. And then column C is enrolled in higher education or some other post-secondary education or training program, or they're competitively employed 1 year after leaving high school. So you'll see kind of our response rates over time. You'll notice that it may seem outdated, but that's because of the lag time for being able to go back and interview the students from that exiting year. So what are our priorities around this? As Matt kind of mentioned, we want to expand our community employment transition program. That's kind of on our radar for this year. How do we expand and grow that program? And how do we improve our secondary transition planning? That's a part of every student's IEP when they get into 8th grade. And it has us start thinking about, what are they going to do for post-secondary education? What are they going to do for employment? And what do they need? What goals do they have for independent living? So those are some of the things that we will be doing to kind of look at strengthening and improving our post-secondary outcomes. Additionally, in special ed, as I have talked to a number of you guys before, safety and behavior is always of our utmost concern. It's one of our #1 priorities in Kennewick. We want to ensure all students are safe, known, and valued, as well as our staff. So I wanted to share tonight just some basic overview of our data points in special education. As Molly Lutz probably shared a couple weeks ago, we had 14 documented special education staff injuries in 2024. 11 of those were tier 3 injuries, and 3 were tier 2 injuries. So and remember, our tier 2 is our inclusion, autism, and behavior, and tier 3 is life skills or autism. You kind of see here who was injured, paraeducator versus teacher, and the level with which the injury occurred. This data is helping us be proactive in our response and getting training. And I'm going to talk a little bit more on the next slide about steps that we're taking to help ensure staff safety and well-being, as well as student safety and well-being. One of the things that you'll note, you'll see there that our tier 3 injuries, there is no discipline. In special education, more than likely, behavior is a result of communication. That's what we always say. And for our tier 3 students, who are our most impacted and vulnerable students, it is a part of their disability, as a part of who they are. Our job is to become behavior detectives and figure out how we help program and support them in the school setting. Switching over to the other side of the screen, you're going to see our discipline rate trend by program, as well as our 23-24 exclusion days rate. What we're looking at here on the top is just our discipline rate by year. So on the top, the orange line is our students with disabilities. One of the things that you'll see that stands out is our special education students are actually being removed from school at a higher rate than their non-disabled peers, which is something that the state looks at and will let us know if or when we're disproportionate. One of the things I wanted to let the board know as well is that in the last 2 years, we were notified. This year, we were not, so that's good. We made headway, and I think that's our partnership with building principals and bringing attention to our discipline rate. But if you are flagged for 3 years in a row, it can actually impact your funding. They can actually take away part of our grant funding if you are disproportionate multiple years in a row. So it's something that is on our administrator data dashboard, something that we are monitoring every month to see where we're at. And really, when we have concerns, we want to be referring to our IEP team processes and the supports that I have listed on the next slide. Additionally, on the bottom down there, you'll see the top row is our students with disabilities. And what stands out is that it appears that students with disabilities are being excluded at a higher rate for 1 day or less than their non-disabled peers. And then also for 10 days or more. So we're kind of looking at where we have a discrepancy between those percentages between our special education students and our non-special education students. So what are we doing? We're providing a variety of training, supports, and resources. Staff in our Tier 2 and Tier 3 programs have access to radios for emergencies to be able to radio for support and help throughout our buildings. We're developing a paraeducator handbook that focuses on our safety protocols and procedures. We continue to offer annual Crisis Prevention Institute training for our teachers, paras, and our administrators. This can also include building-specific training, as well as in some scenarios and circumstances, advanced CPI techniques. So occasionally we have students that demonstrate behavior that is not seen widely across the district, and there's a need to do specialized training. And so we have a team of people that can help support and provide that training. We have an improved process for staff requesting safety gear. All people need to do now is create a Google form. It goes in and we have kind of an inventory here at our office. Our goal is to make sure that people are equipped with the safety gear they need to keep themselves safe in classrooms with students. So we do have that improved process. We have IEP improved safety planning. We have some new documents that have been created that are specific to some of our most concerning behaviors, self-injurious behaviors, students eloping, that are very detailed plans that are helping our building teams be able to respond consistently to student behavior. We continue to have our intervention team provide consultation and problem solving. We continue to have students referred to Candy Mountain Academy. I think we currently have 6 students who are receiving educational services at Candy Mountain Academy. New this year is the Moving All Students, Moving All to Success in Health. It's actually a statewide program called MASH, but it is just new this year in our ESD. We have referred 3 students for evaluation, and essentially the goal is that we're bringing in and partnering with that MASH team to help evaluate and help provide training, coaching, and support our building teams to help maintain students in their current environment. And so again, we have 3 students that we've referred for evaluation and support through that MASH program. We are offering behavior solutions training in February for a number of our buildings. That's a part of our solution tree, part of MTSS, and looking really at that MTSSB. We are sending one of our staff members to Dr. Hanley's practical functional assessment and skills-based treatment training on the west side. She actually is on her way now, which will be a great skill. She will have a level 2 certification for essentially for severe problem behavior. So we will have a trained team member. So we won't have to be contracting out. We will have someone on our staff that can be a level 2 certified contractor for us and help support building teams. Lastly, we revamped our staff professional development this year. We've opened it to all of our staff, special education staff. Every month we offer a different PD session, and people can come in and get clock hours. 2 of those were focused on behavior this year, authoring behavior intervention plans, data collection and analysis, and then behavior supports for our secondary Tier 1 classrooms. Lastly is our families are our key partners. As I mentioned, we have a parent advisory committee who are strong partners with us. They help us kind of review our plans, our efforts, make sure that we know what we need to take to our community partners and what our communication plans will be. We continue to engage our families around our department vision, mission, and objectives. Strengthening what we have available on our website as resources for our families, And then also they've engaged in a process of how they believe as a department that we can, what are our strengths and how, and what are our opportunities for growth. So that is our families as key partners. We are always wanting more families to join us. There's a QR code there for families that may be watching that would like to join our Parent Advisory Committee. Questions, comments?
I have a couple. So I think I mention this every time we go through this about CPI training.
Yes.
So how many of our, like we had 412 staff members within the programs. How many of them are CPI trained?
It's a requirement within 90 days of employment for any staff member in our tier 2 or tier 3 programs. So all of them, it's a requirement of their job in tier 2 or tier 3.
Okay. And then what training, with that training, do we have a CPI instructor or do we send them to?
We have 8 CPI instructors as a part of our team. We offer training every month, essentially every month. We probably offered 4 initial trainings. The initial training is an 8-hour training. The refresher training after you take your initial, which is done every calendar year or school year after your initial, is 4 hours. And we have 8 trainers that train throughout the year.
Can gen ed teachers who have tier 2 or tier 3 classes, can they take that training?
So I believe in their collective bargaining agreement, they're actually, any teacher can request the CPI training. And so that would just be a request that goes through, but I believe that's actually outlined in the collective bargaining agreement.
Okay, so that's
yes.
something they can do. Okay. And then the last question I had for you, please correct me if I heard this wrong. You mentioned that if the state determines that they think that we are disciplining students with disabilities at a higher ratio, then they can turn around and say, we're not going to fund you?
So what happens, and I can use the example, we had been flagged 2 years in a row for disproportionately disciplining for 10 or more days African-American special education students. And we were flagged 2 years in a row. Had it gone to the 3rd year in a row, they then take a certain amount of our grant funding and they hold that, or they tell us that you have to use it on X, Y, or Z. So that's what the disproportionate data, we get notified every year. But thankfully, I think with our efforts and our work around that, we were able to get out of that disproportionate data this year.
So regardless if you're following all the policies, all the state laws, everything's warranted, the state determines you're disproportionate, and we can withhold that grant funding. So I guess where I'm getting at with it is, it seems concerning that if the state's saying, oh no, you're doing this wrong, we're going to withhold your funding. So I'm not saying us, because I would never say that, but it just leads to our people doing things to lower that number because they don't want to lose funding or deal with the state. And again, I'm not saying it's us, I'm just saying collectively across the state. To me, it's like, if people are in that bind, they might be like, oh, well, maybe we're not going to submit that or whatever to lower that number. So it just seems odd that we're going to take your funding away if you're doing everything right.
I think and I will let Matt and Tracy, I think there's a lot of factors that go into discipline for special education students.
Sure.
And some of our students that have a high discipline rate may actually have a behavior disability. And so, what the law says is if it's part of their disability, then it's our job as a team to be getting together that, we can only exclude up to a certain point, but I will let Matt kind of jump in.
This seems like a hard
Can I-
question, Matt.
can I
You
jump
don't
in?
have
Yeah.
easy ones.
Can I jump in maybe
Yes,
real quick
of
before
course
you
you
do?
can, Dr. Pierce.
Okay, thank you, Matt. I think, statistically, like when you look at disproportionality, statistically, if there is disproportionality, it's telling you that there's an issue. There shouldn't be disproportionality. So if there is, I think what the state, first of all, they're saying, hey, recognize that there's disproportionality here and look into why this is. Like their first approach is providing technical assistance. So you can understand, districts can be aware that the disproportionality exists and then try to figure out what in your practices is contributing to that. And then I do think, I mean, from, at some point, I think probably the state's viewpoint is if you're not responding with technical assistance, like that's the only sort of like accountability they have at some point. And they do have a role in holding districts accountable because there's federal rules and there's all these things. So I think I don't think that, but I do think at some point they don't have any other teeth, right, to use. I don't disagree with your point, and that's where we have to be real careful. Even with like LRE is another good example. We want to, let's make sure I say this right, increase our LRE percentage. But what we don't want is somebody to say, oh, here's a student who's currently in tier 3 and with a LRE 3, and we're just going to move that student into a gen ed setting all day long with no support so we can make our LRE number. I mean, that's a disservice to the student. So, I mean, I think that's where we come in to say, yeah, no, we're not going to play games to artificially make some threshold. We want to do this correctly.
Right. Is the state number then for that, is there a formula that dictates that, or does the state say, oh, we think you're over? I guess what I'm looking at is there a metric that determines that, and it's not just arbitrary by the state where they look at it and say, we think you're over, so therefore we're going to flag you.
Yeah, it's a consistent.
Proportionate to what you're doing with your gen ed students, for
Right.
example.
So I mean,
Right, but
same,
it's like 2% over, or something. Like, is there?
Right. I mean, they would, I mean, I believe they would look at it and say, okay, this is the percentage of your kids who are disabled, and here's your percentage of kids who are not. But your percentage of kids who are disabled represent more of your kids who are being suspended. And that adds to the disproportionality. So I think I would just want to, I mean, Tracy said it very well. And I always get a little bit leery as we stand up and we talk a little bit about these things, because it's exactly right. We could lower our inclusion rate we could have 100% of our kids in gen ed classrooms by just administratively saying, we're not going to put anybody else in here. That would be a disservice to our teachers and our students. And we just don't do that.
No.
Similarly with discipline, there is absolutely zero intervention that happens to say, okay, well, if we're disproportionate for kids over 10 days, you can't have any kids who are suspended for 10 days. That just doesn't occur. We look at it more as, how can we develop better practices? It is not about not having consequences for behavior. It's about what consequences can we have that are not exclusionary, because the best place for these students is in school learning the skills that they're not exhibiting. And how can we provide those interventions in a way that makes sense? But there are going to be some kids who they need to be suspended, and we're going to have that happen. And so I just really want to assure the board and the community that that's not, when we see those goals, that is a way we can make them really easily, but that's not how we do it.
Yeah. Well, I guess where I'm getting at is as long as we're doing it right and we're following the law, we're doing all that stuff. I guess where I would get frustrated is if the state came in and said, no, we've arbitrarily decided to withhold your funding because you're high. Well, we're following all the rules and the laws and it just happens to be high. Anyways,
exactly.
That's where I was. Thank you.
So I don't leave yet, because this is exactly the line of question that I had. The same thing. On my visceral level, I don't like this. Like, the state says, okay, if you guys are doing a good job disciplining your kids, then we're going to hold, like, to me, that's crazy. And so just so I understand, so the disproportionality is in regards, it's like comparing our own students, our gen ed students with so in theory, if we had more of our own gen ed kids getting suspended in theory, then that would raise that threshold. Am I understanding that correctly? It's not compared to the state, it's compared to ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, the disproportionality is in, are you suspending one group more than another?
But not compared to ourselves.
So compared to ourselves. I mean, it's not necessarily, as I understand it, it's not based on an arbitrary number set by, it's just saying, here's your percentage of students that are, here's your percentage, and so the percentages should be proportional.
To me, I don't know, like, I think of it backwards. I think of when we're actually following through on disciplined kids, I like that. I'm like, okay, good. We're disciplining our kids the right way. it's like, some people look at it when our discipline numbers go way down, they're happy. I kind of like, are we not disciplining our kids? Like, I think we need to hold our kids to a really high, not that we don't, but I mean.
Can I just chime in with two things? I think one, we have to remember that we're talking about exclusionary discipline, which is kicking a kid out of school for a day or 10 days or whatever. And in all cases, we don't want our first intervention to be you're kicked out of school. We want our first intervention to be logical consequences, different kinds of interventions to stop the behavior, but to keep the kid in school. There are times, however, where it's a safety issue. And I mean, there are certain offenses. If a student brings firearms to school, they're going to be out of school for at least a year. That's what the law says.
Yeah.
When we talk about, it's really important though, and Lexi alluded to this, when we're talking about students with disabilities, there's a part of determining whether the behavior that's being exhibited is related to the student's disability. And I'm going to give you a super silly, ridiculous example just to illustrate. If we had a student in a wheelchair, who was wheelchair bound, and another student who wasn't, and we said, okay, everybody stand up. Everybody stand up, it's time to do X. And the student who wasn't in the wheelchair stood up, or one student who wasn't there's two students, neither of them would stand up, okay? One could clearly stand up, but is being defiant and not standing up. The other student cannot stand up, right? So it's like you would not think, nobody in their right mind would say, we're going to discipline that student because they're not standing up because of their disability. There's other behaviors like biting and scratching that are communication. And if you don't have a disability, that behavior is not tolerated. Of course, I'm going to use Annie. It would not be okay for Annie to bite. But there are other students who might bite because it's related to their disability and they're trying to communicate something. And so also wouldn't be appropriate to discipline that student for the biting. Whereas if Annie bit me or bit somebody, it would be appropriate to hold her accountable for that.
Yeah.
So I just think we have to keep all of that in mind when we're talking about.
That's all, I
students
have all that in
discipline.
mind. I just don't want to like loosen, I don't know.
I think closing this circle or closing the loop on it is essentially if we're doing everything right and it just happens to be where we're at, that's where we're at. It's just disappointing that the state would take funding
Just another
for a program where you're actually
just another stupid state.
doing it right.
Yeah, and again, I think
It is.
it's important to understand, again, it's designating, like, we're still getting the funding, but it's designating, like, you need to do something specific with this because that's the only stick that comes with the carrot, so to speak. And so again, that's why it's incumbent upon us to be putting into place good systems and those types of things, so we're not jeopardizing and causing that to happen. And that's what we really are focused on.
And correct me if I'm wrong, really what they're trying to do is make sure that people are being consistent in terms of their discipline between students who are students without disabilities and students with disabilities. So we're not overly disciplining one of those two groups. Am I hearing that correctly?
Essentially, yeah.
So it's just I think it's a way of trying to give feedback to say, hey, we're not overly disciplining the students with disabilities compared to our general population. I mean, which is reasonable.
Can I ask a question? So I don't know that you'll have the answer to this, but on the slide that says assessing safety and behavior, the top graph that says discipline rate trend, I don't think that that's explicitly exclusion, correct? The one below is exclusion. So the one on top is just any discipline, is that correct?
So the definition, I put it down there so you know how it's calculated.
Right, I wasn't certain because this bottom graph explicitly calls out exclusion rate, so I didn't know if the top graph was also exclusion. So these are both exclusion.
They are. One of them just looks at how many days, and days is a big thing for students with disabilities. So how many days they're being removed.
So what I'm curious about is, do we have this data aggregated for their LRE status? I'm just really curious to know what percentage of these kids that are being excluded are LRE1s? How many of them are LRE2s? How many are LRE3s? Because I think that that has an impact on, I mean, that will certainly tell you a lot about which students are we overly excluding.
I certainly think that between the different data sources that I have, I don't think it's something that I am aware of that the state has made available. But I think based on the data that we have, we could probably get you a rough estimate of where those are based on kind of what we're using for what we call our exclusion days tracker that we have here in Kennewick. And we could look at that and I could try to provide a rough estimate.
I mean, I think it would just be a good practice to look at and make sure that there aren't any discrepancies there as well. And then I'm just curious, when you report data to the state, I mean, it sounds like that is not taken into consideration. They're not looking at LRE status. You did mention demographics. We've talked about in board meetings quite a lot that, you know, you can skew data in such a way if we're only talking about a data set of 2 kids that happen to be part of one demographic. So does the state, when they're reporting back to us and saying, hey, you're disproportionately, you know, disciplining X demographic, are they, and our meeting is over. We just lost. Are they taking into consideration what the data set actually is?
Actually, look at it as a risk ratio. And so, and the risk ratio takes into account the N size or the number of like students in a different demographic in our own data set. So it's actually considered a risk ratio where I think Micah may have said percentage. It's actually based on a risk ratio. And if you're interested, I could show you how that is calculated because it gets sent to us every year to let us know whether or not we've been flagged. And this year we weren't.
I would say, I mean, if you want to send me the data, that's great. I'm not as concerned since we weren't flagged this year, but it is something to, I mean, you guys obviously have an eye on it, so.
Couple things. First of all, thank you. I appreciated how you went through and talked about some of the specific things you've done and are doing this year in your efforts to increase inclusion, specifically highlighting. It appears that we met the goal last year of 3%. The one thing I didn't hear, and maybe I may have just overlooked it, were there a couple of things that you think really drove that 3% increase that led to the change?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. One, we started that IEP compliance check process where we are monitoring at our district office student schedules and making sure that schedules match the minutes in a student's IEP and that they're accurately reflected. I think we started a lot of discussions with our teachers about when they're, and we're really looking more, this year was focused on resource students, right? And within that resource level, there's a continuum even within that level. You can do pull-out support in a resource room. You can do push-in support in a gen ed environment. So we work with building principals to help them understand that, and we work with our teachers. So as more staff thought there's other ways of providing this, it doesn't just have to be the special ed student coming to a special ed classroom. There's other ways to deliver their specially designed instruction. I think that was another big thing that helped move us forward. We did also have a couple buildings that I will say were kind of our early adopters. We're eager, a couple of our high schools that were really, they heard the charge and they were working hard. They had some teachers that wanted to partner together. So I think that was another component that helped this year with the 3% increase.
Okay. So potentially those same things may continue to increase and we may see an exponential increase with the changes that we're making. The other thing, I didn't, correct me if I missed it. You demonstrated it on this slide 46 that in 5th grade, the 5th to 6th grade, there's a significant drop.
Yeah.
I didn't hear exactly why the drop is there. And do we know?
Yes, we do know. So when students qualify, they can qualify in a variety of areas, right? Reading, writing, math, adaptive, social behavior, executive function are all areas that a student can qualify for services in. So when they qualify in elementary school, the model can be quite flexible based on the elementary school day. When we move to 6th grade, it becomes a very rigid schedule. Right now in sixth grade, ELA at the sixth grade level is a 2-hour block. So if we recommend a student, a special education student who has reading or writing for a 2-hour ELA block of special education, that almost pushes them into LRE2 immediately. If they have math, you're suddenly at 3 special education classes. So one of the things that we're looking at is, I think that there is I think we've been looking at just kind of our middle school scheduling. There's a committee looking at our middle school scheduling right now.
Well, we have,
Principals group.
Okay.
so yeah, it's really a scheduling piece. And again, I think we had for many years just a culture where, okay, the students are now moving from elementary to middle school. If parents who've had children move from elementary to middle school, there's a lot of angst with that. So we had well-meaning teachers saying, oh, Johnny is only maybe getting 30 minutes of specially designed instruction in 5th grade, but he's going to need a full period in middle school. So we're kind of undoing that. We really want to focus in on what do the students need and not be dictating their program based on a schedule based on those needs. So that's really how we're attacking that piece, because it is very driven by a schedule at this point in time. And we really want to make sure that it's driven by student needs.
The other great thing is this year with us doing STAR, we have really great data to help inform our decision making. So we've been able to compile all of our data and really make data-driven decisions about what's best for students, because some of our students still may need a special education ELA class or a special education math class, but we will have data to help inform us and help us make those decisions. So that's a really great thing too, having our STAR data district-wide will be really helpful in this process.
Good, perfect. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Sorry, that was loud, kind of aggressive. Well, the stuff went out and then I wasn't sure if the mic was on, so it was a little bit louder. Sorry about that. All right, so we will move on to new business. And the first item up is the hire and approval of Mr. Lance R. Hansen's Superintendent of Schools contract, July 1st, 2025 through June 30th, 2028. I will take a motion to approve the hire and the contract.
I move to approve the contract of Lance R. Hansen. And what to say here? And all the components.
Probably good with the contract.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. We have a motion. Patty, if you will do the roll call vote, please.
Are we doing an advisory vote?
Yeah, sure. Let's
Okay.
do it.
Annie Maltos?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Connors?
Yes.
Dr. Miller?
Yes.
Ms. Gledhill?
Yes.
Mr. Valentine?
Yes.
Mr. Galbraith?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Moving along, we have two policies that Dr. Pierce is going to lead us through. Policy 3206, students, sexual harassment of students prohibited. Policy 5013, personnel, sexual harassment of district staff prohibited. And I think these are probably pretty quick.
I think they should be. The board will recall that earlier this year, we brought you updated versions of these policies per the updated Title IX rules that came out in August. Well, on January 5th, 2025, the federal court issued a decision vacating the U.S. Department of Ed's Title IX rules that went into effect in August. On February 4th, the Office of Civil Rights issued guidance stating that it will begin enforcing the Title IX prior the 2020 Title IX rules. So for these reasons, it's really a procedural thing. We're reverting back, right, to the 2020 versions of these Title IX policies that deal with sexual harassment of students prohibited and sexual harassment of staff prohibited. So what I didn't do is bring you the updated copies and strike through them all, the previously updated copies that you approved in August. Okay, these are the previous 2020 copies,
Previous.
those copies
Yeah.
replaced, if I hope you're tracking with me here. And what I did though is just go through and clean up formatting. And did the comparison with the WASDA model policy, which is now back on the books, these versions. And there were a couple instances where like we had a few sentences left out or anything. This is really all how we respond to complaints of sexual harassment, if it's a student complaint or if it's a staff complaint. So you have both the strike through and the clean copies in front of you for both 3206, which is the sexual harassment of students prohibited, and 5013, sexual harassment of district staff prohibited.
Okay, great. Is there any discussion? We're reverting back to the old previous policy, so procedural stuff. If there's no discussion, I will take a motion for policy number 3206.
I'll make a motion to accept policy 3206 for first and second reading as presented.
Great. Patty, if you could do the roll call vote, please.
Okay. Annie Maltos,
Yes.
Mr. Connors,
Yes.
Dr. Miller,
Yes.
Ms. Gladhill,
Yes.
Mr. Valentine,
Yes.
Mr. Galbraith.
Yes. All right. I will accept a motion for policy 5013.
Oh, yeah.
You want to jump in? You want me to do it again?
Everybody jump in at once.
I'll make a motion for first and second reading of policy 5013 as written.
All right. We have a motion. Patty, if you will do the roll call vote, please.
Annie Maltos,
Yes.
Mr. Connors,
Yes.
Dr. Miller,
Yes.
Ms. Gladhill,
Yes.
Mr. Valentine,
Yes.
Mr. Galbraith.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pierce. All right, so final item of new business is board discussion around academic excellent banquet, which Josh, I'll let you take the lead on this here. And so I know this came up earlier at a study session, but now we're just got it back for a little more discussion tonight. So it's all yours, Dr. Miller.
Yeah, so I had mentioned I'd put together a proposal for an academic excellence banquet. Basically, the purpose of this would be to honor the top graduating academic high school students, seniors within the Kennewick School District. The students would be honored. They'd also have the ability to select an educator within the Kennewick School District that they felt significantly influenced their academic growth and success. The students would be accompanied at the banquet by their parent or guardian. And at the time, they'd be awarded a medal or a certificate, or a medal and certificate. I think it would also be a nice idea to, the educator they selected could also be given a medal or certificate as well. Opportunity to celebrate both the student, parents, as well as the educators in highlighting academic excellence. And to go to Micah's point, really we want to help our students be striving for excellence. And part of that, the selection criteria, which I would suggest would be using a weighted GPA. What this would do is we would need to essentially recalculate the GPAs, where honors classes would be given an additional 0.5 and AP classes would be given an additional 1 point weighting. What this would allow us to do is when we select the top 15 students, it would be selecting the students who have gone out of their way to take academically challenging courses. So students who have been taking a lot of AP classes, honors classes, have been really stretching themselves academically will be rewarded by the system. And so in theory, and no system is perfect, but in theory, you would really have your top academic students at this dinner. And it would essentially be a dinner with the district superintendent, cabinet members, and it would include a keynote speaker. What I would suggest, or I think this would be a great opportunity, is looking for either successful alumni within the area or alumni from our district or notable community members. This would be a great way to tie in community members or successful members within our community or alumni and have them provide a short keynote speech to these students again, focusing on excellence and preparing for their futures. On the proposal, we've got some estimates of cost. I think, initially, this could be done even in one of the high school, at the high schools to try to mitigate cost. And heck, you could even potentially look at TriTech or see if something we could collaborate with them in terms of the food. But I think as we move forward with this, one of the things we could also do is look at sponsors in the community. I've been reaching out. I know I mentioned at the same meeting, different educational foundations. I'm talking with a couple of different educational foundations in the community or in the state and getting a better understanding of how those are working. So I'll be giving you guys more information on those in the future and probably doing that outside of the school district, but that would be another avenue that this banquet could be funded or partially funded. But certainly looking for community sponsors for this event. I'd really love to do it this year. I think it's possible to do. That said, Dr. Pierce, I would look to you you'd know better than I do if it's possible, but I think it would be. And I think it would be a great opportunity to really celebrate the academic excellence in this district.
Question, comment?
Yeah, please.
So, one of the things that I asked that, for my feedback was other high schools, we have other high schools. So you just brought up the idea of TriTech, as an example, what if a kid at Legacy or TriTech or whatever gets like straight A's or something? So would they not, maybe there's a chance for them to get included. Also, if it is one of these celebratory kind of events, then maybe we could even do like for the TriTech kids with food, for example, maybe they can pick their top chef or their top two chefs, or that their top chef can build a team or something like that. And they can prepare the food, and that's like kind of their contribution to excellence. And we picked our best chefs to prepare the best food for this student group. So I'm trying to think of it I know the idea of it is excellence, and I want that, but I like every school to have that chance to push for that excellence.
Yeah, I can appreciate exactly what you're saying. I think the idea of this banquet is to focus initially, due to limiting factors in terms of cost, time, size of how many people we can have there. The idea was my thought was initially start with academics. I think certainly looking to do, for example, in the future, we could do an academic banquet, but also do a district students in excellence banquet where we could select students across a variety of different areas, academics, sports, some of these other areas like within TriTech. And I think initially trying to limit it and make sure it can be successful on a small scale, and then we can look to replicate it in other areas. With regards to the other schools, the alternative schools, I think certainly something to look into. Again, part of it, those schools are much smaller, and maybe we would, it certainly could work, but again, we just need to know numbers. We're trying to, again, I think what we're trying to do is proof of concept first. Do it 1 year, see if it works, see if it's well received, see if it produces the results that we're looking for. And that is celebrating the students, celebrating the teachers. If we get positive feedback, we say, hey, this was a great event, then we can start to say, okay, how can we integrate some of these other things or perhaps do similar things in other spheres? That's why trying to keep it a little simple the first year so that it's clean and we can prove concept.
I like the idea. I'm all for it. If you want to work to iron out the details and go for that, I'd be happy to support it. I know we have great community partners, so there's plenty of people out there that would help, with a space or food or setup or those things. So I think it's a great idea, and I like the idea. Kind of let's get a little pilot in, see how it works, and then build off that to actually build kind of the full, I guess, vision of what you're looking at.
And it could be that instead of just the top 15 students, we take the top 5%, or we take a certain percentage from each school. Again, for the first year, I think keep it simple, just say 15. would calculating weighted grades be difficult to do? Is that something that's easy?
So I just need to follow up with the team and figure that part out. And so, I do agree, we can figure something out this year. It'll all be about picking dates
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. But a couple of things. One, just remember on TriTech, all TriTech students have a home high school.
Yeah.
So they're all connected to a high school and to TriTech. They're not only nobody's
Legacy,
just
Endeavor, if a kid
connected.
at Endeavor gets a 4.0.
Legacy, Phoenix, and Endeavor, of course, are their own high schools. So, so that kind of led me to one question. Assuming we can calculate this, there's a possibility that there's a student, like the top 15 at Kamiakin or something, like aren't necessarily the top, like you took the top 45 district-wide.
Yeah.
So would you rather take the top 45 district-wide irrespective of the high school? Or because it's possible that, do you see what I'm saying? Like,
No, exactly. It's,
Yeah.
it's something I've gone back, and I'm open to discussion on this. My thought was initially, my concern would be is, for example, Kennewick uses the International Baccalaureate, and it doesn't look like it is taken as much. Those classes are taken in as high as numbers as Kamiakin and Southridge take AP classes. So there's a possibility then that when you weight the GPAs, the Kennewick will fall short because they are not taking as many essentially AP level or International Baccalaureate classes. What I don't want to do is disadvantage a high school because they're not doing that. And part of it is high school, I would hate for this to become one high school has 35 kids and the other two high schools have just 2 or 3 kids, and it becomes proportionally disweighted.
I would think we could pull the 45 and see the proportion. And if it is, then we just go to the 15 and you just go down the list and
But
pull.
doesn't that incentivize the Kennewick kids to take more?
Well,
Yes,
programs are different.
But the programs are different, and part of it is again, for the first year on proof of concept, part of it is I want each school to feel invested and feel like they're being highlighted. And that's why, again, on a first year, proof of concept, just making it and saying every school is just going to pull 15.
But if a Legacy kid gets a 4.
Oh, and again, we could say, hey, if at one of the, we'll take of the alternative high schools, Phoenix, Endeavor, and Legacy, we'll take top 2 or the top 3. I again, open.
I just want those high schools to be included in.
Oh, of course.
My
And
point-
part of
my
it
point
is,
number
yeah.
one. And then number 2 is, I think we should have the TriTech prepare the food, if they want to. I think that'd be great, because they're great.
And again, but last minute, that's one of those things, I agree, I think it'd be awesome. The one thing is I don't want to throw something on them in February that throws up their schedule. My thought is in terms of dates, really looking, probably it would be end of April, beginning of May. So last week or 2 of April, first week or 2 of May. That way we're outside of the window of a lot of the graduation stuff. Most of the graduation end of the year stuff won't quite have started. We may still have some things that overlap, but probably doing it on either like a Tuesday or a Thursday evening. So you're doing it, and it would be just a couple hours.
And we
So,
have
yeah,
high
keep
school
going.
principal meetings, and we can get into those, logistics with
Yeah.
dates and things with them because of all of the things that go on at school just that we might not know about.
Exactly.
But I also think on the weighting, we should include, IB is included.
Yeah, I put AP,
Yeah.
but that'd be API.
APIB and college in the high school.
The-
So like we have UW in the high school. That is essentially, it's essentially like taking an AP class.
Yes, but my question is it in our, is that actually taken in the high school?
Yes.
Yes, then yes. If the class is taken in the high school, then it makes sense. Unfortunately, I think CBC is outside of it's no longer part of our high school.
Mhm.
And so that transcript is actually different from ours.
And so running starts.
So running
not
start would be
part of this.
would be a part. And the only reason is because that transcript now gets very difficult because they've elected to go a different route.
Yeah, so I think if the board's kind of all on the same page with what you want to do,
Yep.
our next step would be like, okay, let's get any input from high school principals about what we're maybe not thinking of or something, and then get into the logistics of dates and things like that.
And then maybe just on this, we'll do the 15 from the 3 high schools, if that works for everybody, and then add 3 spots for should we add 3 spots for the,
So add something for the,
yeah, will that? will it
Maybe
make
have
it-
Guy weigh in.
Yeah.
And say, you know,
Will,
have-
part of it is will that make it too complicated in terms of all of the different principles, or will that be doable?
I think it's doable. I think that there's likely going to be a need of a different criteria applied to Legacy Phoenix Endeavor.
Okay, so maybe I'll talk with you specifically about that on what recommendations you might make there. Would that work? Okay, yeah, because I know it's a different demographic. There's some different needs there and
Just different course availability
and-
there
exactly.
and so forth. So, yeah.
I like it. I'll add, Mike down there, sorry.
And
I see you.
okay.
Yeah,
listen,
hi.
you guys
There
don't
he
need
is.
to vote or
I could,
anything.
yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mike.
Nope, it's good. Go nuts.
Is
Love
this
it.
too much to throw at you guys? I mean, we just kind of came up with this a month ago and now we're saying
Just go ahead.
plan this.
Yeah. Well,
You
and
know,
again, I know, again, like I said before, even putting together this proposal, I'm not trying to create more work for more people. I just think this would be a great event, and certainly, please, I'd love to sit down and work together with you on this, and I can help with the details and help with whatever you need. I think it would be the start, from a long-term perspective, going to Micah's. I think this could be an opportunity at the end of the year where we really are celebrating students, staff, coaches, people who've really excelled. And hopefully it changes attitudes and perspectives as people have a greater desire. Students start to say, okay, if I have the choice between taking a regular class or an honors class, I'm going to take the honors class because I want to push myself. I want to do more. If I'm going to take a regular class or an AP class, I'm going to push myself because by pushing themselves, to use Micah's phrase, to pushing towards excellence, it will prepare them for leaving here and leaving high school. It will get them in the attitude of excellence. And when they enter the workforce or enter college or enter the military or enter the trades, they're going to be in an attitude of saying, I want to be the best at whatever I do. I want to excel and I want to push myself to be the best I can be. And that's really what our goal is.
Let's do it.
All right.
Let's do it. Okay. All right, next up on the agenda, our next meeting agenda, we have a study session where we will discuss the State Board of Education updates, and I believe Ron will be here.
Yes,
Does that meet
Ron
with
Avery
us?
is going to be here.
And then we'll also be discussing the vision for alternative programs. And then our business meeting will have our 24-25 budget update. So we have no other businesses authorized by law, so we will adjourn the meeting. Bing.